There are comic books that tell great stories. There are comic books that redefine characters. And then, there are comics that make you remember why you fell in love with comic books in the first place. Today, we are talking about one of the greatest collaborations in modern comics. Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale's Marvel Color series. Daredevil Yellow, Spider-Man Blue, Hulk Grey, and finally, Captain America White. 4 books, 4 colours, 4 heroes. But these stories aren't really about superheroes. They're about memory, about loss, about looking back at the people we used to be. And perhaps most importantly, they are about why the earliest Marvel stories from the 1960s, and in Captain America's case, the 1940s, still matter today. These aren't reboots. These aren't revisions. They are conversations with the past, and in many ways, they are among the finest love letters ever written to Marvel Comics. Before talking about the books themselves, we need to talk about the partnership. Jeff Loeb arrived in comics after working in film and television, bringing a very cinematic style to superhero storytelling. Throughout the 1990s, he became one of DC's defining writers, alongside artist Tim Sale. Together, they produced classics like Batman, The Long Halloween, Dark Victory, and Superman for All Seasons. Notice a pattern? None of those books were interested in replacing continuity. Instead, they looked backwards. They asked what made these heroes timeless. They found emotional truth hidden inside the stories readers already knew. Tim Sale was the perfect artistic partner for that mission. His work never chased realism. Instead, it chased feeling. Characters stretched across impossible pages. Faces become masks of emotion. Buildings leaned and twisted. Everything existed in service of the mood rather than anatomy. Sale understood something many artists forgot. A comic doesn't have to look real, it has to feel true. When Marvel approached Loeb and Sale around the turn of the millennium, they brought exactly that philosophy with them. Rather than modernising Marvel's biggest heroes, they celebrated them. Each book revisits a hero's earliest adventures, but there's a twist. Every story is told from years later. The heroes already know everything that will happen, the victories, the tragedies, the people they'll lose. They are remembering, and that changes everything. We're not reading the stories through the eyes of a young Peter Parker. We are reading them through an old Peter who knows Gwen Stacy is gone. Matt Murdock knows Cam Page's fate. Bruce Banner knows the monster he'll become. Steve Rogers knows what America and Bucky will eventually endure. Memory colours every page, just as our own memories soften, exaggerate, and romanticize the past. These books do exactly the same. Let's begin where the series truly starts. Daredevil Yellow. Yellow is an unusual colour for Daredevil. Most readers instantly picture him in red. The devil, the darkness, Hell's Kitchen. However, Matt Murdock didn't begin in red. His original costume in 1964 was bright yellow and brown. It almost looks cheerful, even awkward, and that's precisely why Loeb and Sale returned to it, as the costume represents loss and justice. The story is framed as a letter. Matt is writing the Karen page. Karen has died years earlier. He's talking to someone who can never answer. He's trying to remember happier times, not because they were perfect, but because they mattered. The early Stan Lee and Bill Everett issues become transformed. The melodrama isn't shocked, it's embraced. Everything feels sincere. Tim Sale draws the yellow costume almost like a memory from childhood. Slightly oversized, slightly clumsy, but full of heart. The colour itself represents innocence. Before tragedy, before Elektra, before Bullseye, before death became a constant companion. Yellow becomes nostalgia, not because the costume was better, but because life was simpler. If Daredevil Yellow is wonderful, Spider-Man Blue is extraordinary. Many consider it the masterpiece of the series, and it's easy to see why. Peter Parker isn't narrating another origin. He's recording on an old cassette tape. He's talking to Gwen Stacy, the love of his life, a woman who died decades ago. He knows Mary Jane is waiting for him. He loves MJ. But grief isn't logical. Sometimes you simply need to remember. Blue immediately works on multiple levels. Spider-Man's classic costume is red and blue, but blue is also sadness, melancholy, regret. The entire book asks an uncomfortable question. What if Peter never truly stopped mourning Gwen? Rather than retelling early Lee and Romita comics panel for panel, Loeb slips in emotional moments between the pages we already know. The Vulture, the Green Goblin, the Rhino, they're all there. But the real story happens in conversations, in stolen glances, in quiet moments. Sale's art captures the energy of John Romita Sr. without imitating him. Everyone smiles bigger, laughs louder, swings higher. It's how memories work. We don't remember every detail. We remember feelings. We share feelings. We understand feelings. That's what Spider-Man Blue understands better than almost any Spider-Man story. Bruce Banner's story is different. Unlike Matt or Peter, Bruce is remembering someone who shaped the very beginning of his tragedy, Betty Ross. The woman who always believed Bruce could be more than the Hulk, but started by hating the Hulk. Again, the story is structured as therapy. Bruce is speaking to Doc Samson. He's examining memories he rarely allows himself to visit. The colour grey is fascinating. Before becoming green, the Hulk was grey. Printing limitations and hyped Frankenstein toys in the early 1960s forced Marvel to abandon the colour. An accident of publishing history became one of comics' biggest visual changes. Loeb transforms that accident into symbolism. Grey represents uncertainty. Bruce isn't yet the unstoppable Green Hulk, nor the savage monster. He's trapped between identities, between humanity and rage, between fear and hope. Sale's Hulk feels enormous, not simply physically, emotionally. Every movement feels heavy, every expression aches. Betty becomes the emotional centre of the story, not because she's helpless, but because she represents the life Bruce might have had if he didn't step in to save Rick Jones that day. Grey becomes the colour of limbo, neither light nor darkness, neither man nor monster. And finally, the most complicated book, Captain America White. Not because of its story, but because of its journey. Originally announced in 2008, the book wouldn't be completed until 2015, a 7-year delay, partly due to Loeb's increasing television responsibilities, partly due to Tim Sale's workload. The series that once seemed complete suddenly had one missing chapter. When Captain America White finally arrived, it carried unexpected weight, not only because of the delay. The Marvel Universe was changing, more characters, more event-driven, yet here came Loeb and Sale, once again, looking backwards. Steve Rogers revisits memories of Bucky Barnes. Not the Winter Soldier, not the man eventually recovered, the Bucky Steve believed had died in World War II. That's important. This is grief frozen in time. White is perhaps the most interesting colour choice. White isn't even his most defining colour. but it represents idealism, hope, a new beginning, the blank page of history before it becomes stained by war. Unlike the other books that celebrate the 1960s Marvel Universe, Captain America White reaches even further back, to the Golden Age, to Joe Simon and Jack Kirby's patriotic adventures during World War II. Tim Sale evokes wartime propaganda posters, simple compositions, strong silhouettes, bold heroism. It's not ironic, it's affectionate, because Steve Rogers remembers a time when good and evil seemed easier to define. Whether they actually were is a whole nother question entirely. This is where the series becomes something special. Every protagonist is remembering or communicating to someone they've lost. Matt writes to Karen. Peter speaks to Gwen. Bruce reflects on Betty through Doc Samson. Steve's internal reflection to Bucky. The letters never receive replies. The thoughts never receive responses. They're not meant to. The act of remembering becomes the story itself. And here's the brilliant part. The reader is doing exactly the same thing. Longtime Marvel fans are remembering those early Stan Lee comics. The jazzy dialogue, the simpler morality, the bright costumes. We are remembering the comics that made us comic readers. The heroes remember people. We remember stories. The emotional structure mirrors itself. That's why these books resonate so deeply. It would have been easy to simply remake the old comics. Modern dialogue, modern art, smoother pacing. Instead, Loeb chooses addition over replacement. The original stories still exist. These books simply reveal the emotional space between them. It's almost like watching deleted scenes that somehow make the original film even better. Nothing is contradicted. Everything is enriched. Karen's smile means more. Gwen's conversations matter more. Betty's patience carries greater weight. Bucky's enthusiasm becomes heartbreaking. You cannot discuss these books without talking about Tim Sale, because in many ways, his artwork is the series. Sale understood silhouette better than any other artist. You could recognise his Spider-Man from a shadow, his Daredevil from posture alone, his Hulk from pure shape. He wasn't interested in photographic anatomy. He exaggerated. He distorted. He simplified. Everything served emotion. His pages breathed. Characters have room to exist. Quiet moments are allowed to remain quiet. Modern superhero comics often chase the spectacle. Sale chased atmosphere. He once spoke about trying to capture the feeling of old comics, rather than literally copying them. That's the key. His work isn't nostalgic because it imitates old styles. It's nostalgic because it recreates how old comics felt when we first read them. That's an enormous difference. His figures are expressive. His use of negative space is fearless. His storytelling is crystal clear. Every page turns effortlessly. And the colorist Richard Insanoff deserves enormous credit as well. His painted colours wrap Sale's expressive line work in warmth. The books almost feel dreamlike, like memories fading around the edges. Superhero comics often obsess over the future. Who's replacing who? Who's dying next? Who's returning? The Marvel Color series asks a different question. Why did these heroes matter in the first place? Not through continuity, not through crossover, not through shocking twists, through people. Matt loved Karen, Peter loved Gwen, Bruce loved Betty, Steve loved Bucky. Everything else is secondary. That's why these stories endure, because beneath every costume, there's someone remembering the people who made them and who they are. Looking back now, especially after Tim Sale's passing in 2022, these books have become even more poignant. His artwork always seemed fascinated with memory, the seasons changing, with moments slipping away. His heroes never felt invincible. They felt human. Even when they stood 6 foot tall in impossible poses, he reminds us that comics are an emotional medium, not simply an action medium. And perhaps that's why the Marvel Color Series continues to find new readers, year by year, decade by decade, because every one of us understands remembering. We've looked back on old photographs, old letters, old friendships, older versions of ourselves. These books simply give superheroes that same experience. The Marvel Color Series isn't just about colours. Yellow is innocence, blue is grief, grey is uncertainty, white is idealism. But together, they paint something larger. A portrait of memory itself. Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale didn't rewrite Marvel history, they honoured it. They reminded us that stories from the 1960s and the 1940s still have power. Not because they're perfect, but because they were where everything began. Like the heroes writing letters to the people they've lost, we are all writing letters to comics, in one way or another, that made us fall in love with this medium. And perhaps that's why these books feel timeless, because no matter how many new stories are told, there's always something magical about going home.